I slept on my son's couch for 3 weeks after my husband traded me for his secretary. The cushions molded to my spine like regret. I wasn't allowed to touch the good towels, drink the good coffee, or adjust the thermostat. One morning, while I was reheating water in the microwave for instant coffee, my son looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you wanted comfort, Mom, you should have stayed married." That was the moment something snapped. They thought I was invisible, a burden, a failed woman too old to rebuild. But what they didn't know, what they never saw coming, was that the very next day I bought a $10 lottery ticket and won $2.5 million. I didn't tell a soul, not yet, because this isn't a story about revenge. This is a story about power. The kind that whispers, the kind that waits, the kind that walks away and makes you chase it. The couch smelled like aftershave, vanilla candles, and faint regret. 3 weeks of restless nights had molded the cushions to my aging spine, every spring a reminder of how far I'd fallen. I lay there before dawn most mornings, staring at the ceiling of my son David's living room, trying to pretend this was just a phase, a pause, a comma in a sentence I hadn't finished writing. After 35 years of marriage, I had signed the divorce papers with hands that barely stopped shaking. My husband walked away with a condo in Miami and a secretary half my age. I walked away with 2 suitcases and the number to my son's apartment. David had answered with a tone of practiced sympathy, the kind that felt memorized. "Of course, Mom, you can stay here for a bit until you figure things out." Bit was the word he used. Not as long as you need. Not your home, just a bit. That bit had turned into 21 days of walking on eggshells across floors I wasn't allowed to tread on with shoes. The thermostat was off limits. The kitchen was a minefield of invisible boundaries. Don't use the wedding china. Don't cook anything that smells. Don't touch the espresso machine. Everything I did was a negotiation with silence. Stephanie, my daughter-in-law, was precise in her avoidance. She'd enter the room with a tight smile, offering greetings that felt like formality at gunpoint. "Morning, Helen." That name again. Not Mom, not even Mrs. Montgomery, just Helen. It was subtle, but deliberate. Like she was reminding me, every time she said it, that I no longer belonged. The worst part was, I agreed with her. I wasn't proud of that. But after decades of raising David, of packing lunches, ironing shirts, sitting front row at every school play, I now sat on a fold-out couch, wondering if I was overstaying a welcome that never truly existed. They made no effort to hide their discomfort. I overheard whispers behind the bedroom door, fragments of sentences. "She's still here. This isn't sustainable. We need boundaries." Stephanie's rules were never spoken aloud, but I learned them quickly. Use the guest bathroom. Label your food. Never adjust the blinds. Always ask before touching anything that might be hers. Once I moved a set of placemats while wiping down the table. That night, they were back in their original position, perfectly aligned. A silent correction. I told myself it was just temporary, that I just needed to get through a few weeks until the lawyers finalized the asset division. Then I'd get the condo in Jacksonville. Then I'd start over. Then I'd be fine. But every morning, the weight of starting over at 67 crushed me just a little more. I found myself shrinking, making less noise, waking earlier so I wouldn't interrupt their morning routine. I used the microwave for everything, even boiling water for tea, because the stovetop felt like enemy territory. Stephanie had a ritual. She'd glide into the kitchen around 6:45, dressed immaculately in business casual, her blonde hair always pinned. She'd make a protein smoothie, eat half an avocado with sea salt, and check emails on her phone. She never acknowledged my presence unless David was watching. Then her tone shifted. Polite, warm even, performance for his benefit. David, on the other hand, was distant in the way people become when guilt turns into resentment. He'd hug me in the morning sometimes, but his arms felt like obligation. We'd share small talk, weather, news headlines, how crowded the subway was, but he never asked how I was really doing. Once, I tried. I asked him over dinner if he remembered the treehouse I'd built for him when he was 8. how we spent an entire weekend sawing wood and hammering nails, even though I had no clue what I was doing. He smiled vaguely. Yeah, I think so. That was it. He remembered it as vaguely as I remembered what I ate for breakfast. Stephanie had made roasted chicken that night. She placed the dish on the table and looked at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Hope it's not too salty, Helen. Again, that name. I smiled back. I'm sure it's perfect, dear. It was, but I could barely taste it. That night, back on the couch, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan. It turned slowly, like the thoughts in my head. I didn't belong here. Not really. And yet, this was the only place I had left. I used to be someone. A wife. A mother. A woman who organized bake sales and tax files and holiday dinners. Now I was a guest. No, worse. A tolerated inconvenience. I turned on my side and pulled the throw blanket up to my chin. The cushions creaked beneath me. This wasn't a life. It was a waiting room. A holding cell dressed in vanilla candles and passive-aggressive silence. And I didn't know how much longer I could stay without disappearing entirely. The morning it all broke open started like any other. I woke up before dawn, careful not to shift the couch cushions too loudly. I tiptoed into the kitchen, heating water in the microwave for instant coffee, the same brand I used to donate to food drives. I sat quietly, staring into the mug like it might hold answers, when David emerged from the hallway in his charcoal suit, tie half loosened, sleep still in his eyes. "Mom," he said with a tight smile, "you're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I replied, taking a careful sip. "Didn't want to be in the way." He scratched at his jaw. I saw the hesitation before he spoke, and already something in me tightened. "Listen, Stephanie and I were talking." The air thickened. "She's been feeling anxious, with the baby coming. The doctor says we should reduce stressors." I blinked. I didn't realize I was a stressor. "That's not what I mean," he said quickly, stepping closer. "It's just the second bedroom. We really need to start setting it up. Paint, furniture, baby things." I looked at him fully then, the son I once taught how to tie his shoes, now avoiding my gaze like a boy caught lying. "And where do you suggest I sleep, David?" He sighed, almost in relief, like he'd been waiting for the door to open. "I did some research. There's this really nice senior living community about 10 miles away. They have meal plans, activities. Do I look like I'm ready for bingo nights and water aerobics?" "It's temporary," he insisted, "just until you get your own place." I set my mug down a little too hard. "You already said that, the day I arrived." "Just a bit, remember?" His face tightened. "You know this arrangement was never permanent." My voice dropped. "Because I was never meant to stay." He didn't answer. And then, with the clumsiness only cruelty can wear when disguised as reason, he muttered, "If you wanted comfort, Mom, you should have stayed married." "Distan." The words landed like ice water down my spine. I stared at him, my own son, who I had carried, nursed, protected, educated, and now discarded me like a broken chair. "I see," I said, more to myself than him. "Thank you for clarifying where I stand." "Mom," but I was already walking toward the hallway, into the shadows of silence where I'd lived for 3 weeks. That evening, I overheard them talking. They thought I was asleep. Their bedroom door was slightly ajar, voices carrying through the narrow apartment like whispers in a confessional. "She's too sensitive," Stephanie said. "We gave her 3 weeks, David. Most people would have figured something out by now." "She's just adjusting," he said, weaker than I'd hoped. "She's making me uncomfortable in my own home," she snapped. "I'm pregnant. I need peace. She hovers. She watches everything I do. She rearranged the dish towels again today." "You're right," he said after a pause. "We'll bring up the senior home again tomorrow." I backed away from the door, cold crawling up my spine. So it wasn't just Stephanie. It was David, too. They had been planning this, planning my exit. Behind politeness and performative kindness, they'd always seen me as temporary, a placeholder, a burden. Later that night, while the city buzzed outside and their bedroom lamp clicked off, I folded the blanket on the couch with care. I packed my things into the same 2 suitcases I had dragged in 3 weeks earlier. I didn't cry. I didn't write a note. I simply left. No dramatic exit, no confrontation, no last words. I stepped out into the night with only my purse, my suitcases, and the resolve that whatever dignity I had left deserved better than this silent exile dressed up as hospitality. As the door shut behind me, I stood for a moment in the hallway of their apartment building, the same hallway where I'd once helped David carry up his college books, where I'd once knocked with a birthday cake when Stephanie turned 30. I'd become invisible here, and I refused to remain unseen any longer. Outside, the city was cold but honest. No passive-aggressive smiles, no fake greetings, just headlights and wind and strangers who didn't know my name, which somehow felt more merciful than hearing it misused by people who should have loved me best. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of a small motel near the train station. I had no plan, no job, barely any money, just the freedom that comes when there's nothing left to lose. And as the cab pulled away, I looked back at the apartment window. They wouldn't notice I was gone until morning. But by then, it would be too late. I would already be someone else, somewhere else, and they would have to learn what it felt like to be left behind. The motel smelled like bleach and lost dreams. The kind of place people ended up when they had nowhere else to go. My room was the size of my old walk-in closet, with a bedspread that felt like sandpaper and a bathroom mirror so warped it distorted my face. I paid for 2 nights with cash, money I'd withdrawn from my secret emergency account, the one Walter never knew existed. It had 847 years left after the motel bill. I spent the next 2 days haunting the library a few blocks away, not reading, just existing. I sat at the corner table near the radiator, sipping from a lukewarm vending machine coffee, pretending I was still someone with a routine, someone with purpose. When I was too tired to pretend, I dozed off in the reading nook, clutching my coat and praying no one would wake me. I ate instant noodles from a paper cup and rationed protein bars like currency. I'd tell myself this was temporary, but the voice in my head was already starting to laugh at the word. On the 3rd night, I walked to the corner market just before closing. Mr. Lin, the owner, greeted me with the same gentle nod he gave every regular. I'd been there once before, weeks ago, buying almond milk for Stephanie. He didn't recognize me. "Cold night," he said as I counted out single bills for a can of soup and a sleeve of crackers. I nodded. "Feels colder when you have nothing to go home to." He didn't ask questions, just offered a small smile. "Feeling lucky tonight?" I looked where he pointed, the lottery ticket display. The Powerball sign flashed in neon red. $2.5 million. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the last $10 I had in the world. It was supposed to be for gas, in case I found a job interview, or maybe another motel night, or food. But I handed it over like it was nothing. "Quick pick," I said. He slid the ticket across the counter and handed me my change, 2 crumpled singles. "Good luck, Mrs. Helen," I said. "Just Helen." Back in the motel room, I left the soup unopened. I turned on the tiny TV and muted the sound, watching the flickering images while my mind drifted. What would I do with $2.5 million? I imagined buying a house. A real house, with a porch and a fireplace and thick walls that kept you warm without permission. I imagined never having to ask to use the good towels. I imagined never hearing someone say my name like it was a burden. The numbers flashed on screen during the 11 o'clock news break. I wasn't paying attention. Not at first. It was only when they repeated the Powerball drawing that my eyes shifted toward the screen. 8, 19, 24, 37, 41, Powerball 12. I pulled the crumpled ticket from my wallet. My hands trembled as I read each number. Powerball 12. I checked it again, then again, then again. All 6 matched. I wasn't breathing. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the paper in my hand. A piece of cheap ink on thermal stock that suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. My pulse thundered in my ears. The room spun slightly. My knees felt like they might give out. I pressed the ticket against my chest. I had won. I had won $2.5 million. But I didn't feel joy. Not relief, not excitement, not even disbelief. Just silence. The kind of silence that follows trauma. A numbness so complete it felt like grief. I didn't scream. I didn't jump up and down. Instead, I placed the ticket carefully inside my Bible, zipped it into the lining of my suitcase, and sat back down. My first thought wasn't celebration, it was strategy. This was not a gift, it was a weapon. A quiet, beautiful, loaded weapon. The next morning, I called the lottery office from a payphone across from the laundromat. I disguised my voice as best I could. "Congratulations," the woman said. "We'll need your ID, Social Security, and the ticket itself. Please sign the back and keep it somewhere safe. Would you prefer a lump sum or annuity?" "Lump sum," I said without hesitation. After taxes, they estimated I'd walk away with just under $1.8 million. I gave them a callback number I borrowed from a prepaid phone I picked up that afternoon. Then I spent the rest of the day at the library, not hiding, but planning. I researched shell companies, trust funds, how to quietly transfer large sums without triggering red flags. I looked into rural properties under $500,000, far from cities, far from expectations, places where I could vanish and start again. And I made a promise to myself, no one would know what I now owned. Not David, not Stephanie, not Walter. They didn't get to see this version of me. They didn't get to share the future they abandoned. The Helen they cast aside had died quietly on a couch. The new one was building herself from the ashes with enough cash to never need a single soul again. I arrived at the farm in a borrowed car with a new name on the purchase agreement and a bank account opened under a trust. The agent, a woman named Carol with tired eyes and a fast walk, showed me around like she couldn't wait to close the deal. "This one's been sitting too long," she said, pushing open the creaky front door. "Estate sale. The heirs are desperate to unload it." I looked around at the dust and disrepair and felt, for the first time in weeks, something like ownership. The windows were foggy, the floors uneven, but it had land, 40 acres of it, space, solitude, and silence of a kinder kind. "I'll take it," I said before we reached the kitchen. "No inspections?" She blinked. "All cash. 20 days, drop the papers." I signed as Harriet Lynn, consulting analyst for sustainable agricultural ventures. That was my cover. Just enough truth to pass, just enough fiction to protect. The lottery money had already been routed through a network of trusts and shell companies. Not even the IRS would be able to link it to the name Helen Montgomery. After the deal closed, I hired contractors to stabilize the barn and repair the roof of the caretaker's cottage out back. It was a squat little structure, once used for seasonal help. I had plans for it now. I needed help. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. Someone with a reason to stay. Her name was Riley Jensen, 23, a vet student who'd taken a leave of absence after her scholarship fell through. I found her via an ad on a local board, asking for housing in exchange for light farm work. When she showed up with a backpack and a hopeful smile, something inside me stirred. "I'm not much of a farmhand," she said, brushing hair from her eyes, "but I can feed animals, medicate, help with rehab if you're taking in rescues." "I am," I replied. "That's exactly what I'm doing." I hadn't planned to say that until the words fell out of my mouth, but in that moment, it became true. She moved into the caretaker's cottage the same week the fencing was installed. We picked up our first rescues from a bankrupt riding academy. 3 horses, underweight and skittish, dumped like forgotten furniture. One of them, a black gelding named Atlas, refused to be touched for days. "He's scared," Riley said, kneeling quietly by the fence. "Not mean, just doesn't know how to trust again." I nodded. I know the feeling. Over the next few weeks, dogs came from the shelter. Cats, too. A pair of goats from a backyard petting zoo that had been foreclosed. I told Riley we'd expand slowly, but she threw herself into the work like someone whose soul had finally found a home. We built routines, Morning feedings, vet checks, hay deliveries. I taught her how to budget supply orders and track expenses, using spreadsheets I hadn't opened since before David was born. One night, over soup and grilled cheese in the main house, Riley leaned back and sighed. "You know something weird?" she said. "Back in high school, this woman I barely knew paid part of my tuition." I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. She didn't leave her name. Just wrote a check directly to the bursar's office. My mom never found out who it was. We always thought it was a fluke or maybe some scholarship I forgot to apply for. I said nothing. My throat had tightened. "I only bring it up," she continued, "because I got a similar vibe when you offered me this job. Like, you'd already decided I was worth saving." I smiled gently. "Maybe I just saw someone who reminded me of someone I once lost." She nodded, eyes soft. "Well, whoever helped me back then changed everything. I don't know if I ever said thank you." "You just did." I excused myself quickly, retreating to my bedroom before she could see my hands trembling. It had been me, of course. Years ago, I'd read about Riley's story in a local paper, a straight-A student at risk of dropping out due to a family illness. Something about her photo had stopped me cold. Maybe it was the way her eyes looked right into the camera, defiant but desperate. I'd written the check that night. I never thought I'd see her again. Now here she was, unknowingly repaying a kindness she never knew had come from me. And maybe that's what hope was. Not grand gestures or second chances, but quiet, unfinished loops that find their way back to you. Each animal we rescued felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Every trembling paw, every skittish ear, every cautious step, I saw in them my own story, discarded, displaced, but not yet broken. This was my new beginning, not with revenge, but with restoration, not with fury, but with freedom. The call came on a Thursday. Riley and I had just finished unloading a delivery of grain, sweat still clinging to our necks when my prepaid phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring, again and again, until silence returned like a faithful dog. I didn't need to answer to know. Somehow, the past had found me. Later that evening, as twilight dipped the fields in silver, a car engine crackled against the gravel drive. I didn't look up right away. I knew the rhythm of that engine. David's old silver sedan, the one he used to tell me was too valuable for me to borrow during job interviews. When I finally glanced toward the fence, they were there. David looking thinner, paler. His tie was loose, shirt untucked. He'd always prided himself on his appearance, even in college when he couldn't afford much. Now he looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. Beside him stood Stephanie, her baby bump unmistakable even under the oversized hoodie she wore. Her usual polished look had vanished. Her hair was pulled into a frizzy bun, and her eyes scanned the farm like a skeptic in foreign land. Behind them, a U-Haul truck waited, packed to the brim. My hand stilled on the brush I'd been using on Atlas. The gelding nickered softly beside me, sensing the shift in my posture. "Mom," David called out, voice hoarse. "Mom, we need to talk." I didn't move. "Please," he added. "We didn't know where else to go." Of course they didn't. I walked slowly toward the gate. Riley appeared on the porch of the main house, silent, arms folded across her chest like a sentry. Stephanie spoke next. "We lost the apartment. The bank foreclosed. David, he lost his job." I arched an eyebrow. Scandal at Henderson and Brooks, wasn't it? David flinched. I already knew the story. A mutual acquaintance had leaked it to a local paper weeks ago. David had greenlit a risky account reallocation, costing the firm nearly $500,000 in client losses. The board needed a scapegoat. He became the perfect one. "Stephanie's mother wouldn't take us in," he mumbled, "and no one else." "Would have you?" I finished, my voice even. He nodded, ashamed. I looked at my son, this man I had raised, protected, defended through playground fights and teenage arrogance and wedding day panic attacks. He had told me, not even 2 months ago, that if I wanted comfort, I should have stayed married. Now he stood at my gate with a baby on the way. No job, no home, no plan. Poetic. I turned to Stephanie. She met my gaze, then looked away. "Well," I said finally, "you can stay." Their shoulders sagged with relief. Too soon. In the cottage, I added. They froze. The caretaker's house, I clarified. Behind the barn, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. Riley used to stay there. Stephanie blinked. We thought we could stay with you in the main house. I'm sure you did, I replied, but this is what I'm offering. Take it or leave it. David started to speak, but I cut him off with a look. You said you had nowhere else to go, I reminded them. I'm giving you a roof. That's more than you gave me. Riley stepped forward then, jangling a set of keys. I'll show you around, she said flatly. Linens are in the hallway closet. The hot water's finicky. Don't run the washer and shower at the same time. Stephanie didn't move. David placed a hand on her back, guiding her toward the U-Haul. As they passed me, Stephanie paused. Thank you, she said, almost choking on the words. We didn't know. I didn't ask what she meant. It didn't matter. I watched them carry their things into the little house once meant for hired hands. Furniture too large for the narrow doorways, boxes stacked like remnants of a better life. The same woman who once banned me from walking on her white carpets was now laying down a crib on floors worn soft by boots and dog paws. It should have felt like justice. Maybe it was. But that night, I sat alone on the porch, glass of wine in hand, and thought, how many ways can love be refused before it stops offering itself at all? Riley joined me, wiping dirt from her jeans. Not exactly the reunion you expected, she murmured. No, I said. It's better. She studied me. You going to let them off the hook? I took a long sip of wine. They're not even on the hook yet. The morning after they moved in, I knocked on the cottage door just as the sun spilled gold over the pasture. Riley stood beside me, clipboard in hand, wearing that same no-nonsense expression I'd come to trust. David answered the door, bleary-eyed, shirt wrinkled, hair uncombed. Stephanie hovered in the background, cradling her belly like a shield. Breakfast is at 6. Work begins at 7. Sharp, I said. David blinked. Work? This is a working farm, not a vacation, I replied. Everyone contributes. You'll assist with feeding, mucking, maintenance. There are no exemptions. Stephanie stepped forward. But I'm 7 months pregnant. And you won't be lifting a finger, I said, looking her squarely in the eye. But David will be doing twice the work. You can help with light tasks, bookkeeping, supply inventory, maybe bottle feeding the kittens when they arrive. David's jaw tightened. And if we refuse? I raised an eyebrow. Then the highway is just past the mailbox. And he said nothing. I pulled a folded sheet from my pocket and handed it to him. House rules, I said. You'll follow them or you'll leave. He scanned the list. 1, no alcohol. 2, no guests without approval. 3, no TV after 9 p.m. 4, everyone works, no exceptions. 5, no complaints. You can't be serious, David muttered. Oh, I'm painfully serious, I said, my voice calm. Ask the goats. They're sticklers about Rule 5. Stephanie chuckled, despite herself. David didn't. You're making us live like staff, he snapped. I shrugged. You said you needed help. This is help, just not the kind you imagined. Stephanie took the list from his hands and read it more slowly. Her face paled at the bottom of the page where I had handwritten a final rule. 6. Gratitude is non-negotiable. Her lips trembled. We don't have a choice. Neither did I said, and the air shifted around us. Neither did I when you left me on that couch with my name replaced by silence. When you rationed hot water and gave me rules instead of kindness. When you told me comfort was something I should have stayed married for. David looked away. Stephanie's eyes filled. I cried in the shower, I continued, when I could finally take one without racing the clock or burning my skin on cold. I hid food so I wouldn't be accused of taking up space in your fridge. I apologized for existing. And when you asked me to leave, when you said there were better arrangements, I didn't even fight. My voice caught, but I didn't let it fall. Now you're here, and you'll follow my rules. Not because I need revenge, but because you need humility. Stephanie stepped closer. We were wrong. Yes, I said. And now you'll have the privilege of proving you can be right. She nodded slowly. We'll do better. I believed her. Or maybe I just wanted to. David's pride took longer to crumble. That first week, he sulked more than he worked. He moved hay with a scowl, huffed every time Riley corrected his form, and muttered under his breath when the fencing schedule didn't suit his mood. Riley didn't flinch. She handed him heavier tools. By week 2, he'd stopped talking back. By week 3, his hands were blistered and calloused, and by the end of the month, he stopped checking his phone during feeding rounds. Stephanie proved surprisingly useful in the administrative work. She organized my years of receipts into spreadsheets, streamlined our supply ordering system, and suggested a bookkeeping app that made tracking donations easier. She worked quietly, often late into the night, belly pressed to the desk, breath shallow from the weight of carrying both a baby and her shame. We didn't talk much, but we didn't avoid each other either. One evening, I found her on the cottage porch, watching Riley toss sticks for the dogs. The sun had dipped behind the hills, and the porch light cast Stephanie's face in soft amber. "Thank you," she said, not looking at me. "For what?" I asked. "For not turning us away." I sat beside her. "I thought about it," I admitted, "for about 5 minutes. I wouldn't have blamed you," she said. "No," I replied. "But you would have resented me." She nodded. There was a silence then. Not awkward, just quiet. "I used to think love was supposed to look like comfort," she said finally. "Soft things, smiles, warm meals. And now? Now I think love looks like structure, like someone refusing to let you keep being less than you could be." I looked at her. "You're not the same woman who called me Helen like it was a slur," I said softly. She flinched. "I'm trying not to be." "Good," I replied, "because my grandson deserves better." She smiled then, a real one. Later that night, I sat alone on the porch of the main house. The wind was soft, the air fragrant with hay and pine. The animals had all been fed. The chores were done. And in the distance from the cottage, I heard laughter. Not cruel, not superior, just tired, relieved laughter. And for the first time since they arrived, I allowed myself to believe. Maybe this wasn't punishment anymore. Maybe it was redemption. David Montgomery was not made for labor. He came from a long line of men who wore ties to work, who learned about hard things only through spreadsheets and quarterly reports. His hands, once soft from years of typing and PowerPointing, now bore the blistered map of unfamiliar tools: pitchforks, brushes, wheelbarrows. The first time I watched him try to bathe a horse, I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Atlas, the largest and most stubborn of our rescues, towered over him like a living monument to David's discomfort. "You'll want to move slower," Riley said, standing nearby with her arms crossed. "He doesn't like surprises." David, soaked from a misdirected hose, glared but nodded. His movements grew more deliberate, hesitant but deliberate. Later that week, he learned to patch broken fencing, then clean stalls, then repair the chicken coop roof after a storm split it open like a tin can. He didn't complain, not audibly, but I saw the shifts, less grumbling, fewer pauses, and, most telling of all, he stopped checking his reflection in the window glass. Humility had a scent, I discovered. It smelled like mud and horse sweat and the piney bite of salve you rub into aching joints. Stephanie, meanwhile, found her rhythm in the quiet corners of the farm. She gravitated to the chickens first. Perhaps it was the way they strutted, with fragile arrogance, or how they squawked at the world with no clue what was really happening. She fed them carefully, lined their nesting boxes with extra straw, spoke to them in soft murmurs. Next came the dogs and cats, especially the weak ones. The underweight, the limping, the frightened. She knelt beside a matted golden retriever one morning, running her fingers gently over his knotted fur. "I used to be scared of big dogs," she admitted without looking up. "Now I feel like they understand things better than people." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Something was changing in her. Something subtle, like a door left open just long enough for fresh air to sneak in. She still tired easily. The pregnancy weighed on her like a stone strapped to her spine, but she never asked for rest, never used it as an excuse. She did what she could and didn't complain. until the day she pushed too far. It was a Saturday morning, unusually hot for early spring. Riley and I were replacing feed buckets when we heard the crash. A bucket of grain had spilled near the goat enclosure, and Stephanie was crumpled beside it, one hand on her belly, the other gripping a fence post like it might save her from drowning. "Stephanie!" I dropped everything and ran. She was pale, her lips bloodless. "I felt a pull," she gasped. "Something's wrong." Riley was already dialing. The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights and clenched teeth. Stephanie whimpered softly in the back seat, every bump in the road a betrayal. "Hang on," I whispered. "You're not going to lose him. Not today." Her eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, and for the first time since the day she married my son, I saw raw, unfiltered trust. At the ER, they rushed her in. I waited, not as a mother-in-law, not even as family, just a woman with too much history and too much at stake. David arrived 20 minutes later, panting, covered in dirt. "Where is she?" he gasped. "Inside," I said. "They're running tests." He looked at me, then sank into the chair beside me. No snide comments, no defensiveness, just exhaustion and fear. Hours passed. Eventually a doctor emerged, clipboard in hand. "She's stable," he said. "Dehydration, overexertion, but the baby's heart rate is strong. We've stopped the contractions." David exhaled like a man surfacing from deep water. "She'll need bed rest," the doctor continued. "No stress, no physical strain at all." We nodded in unison. That night, I brought her home, slowly, carefully, and settled her onto the cottage couch. Riley had already fluffed the pillows and set out extra blankets. David hovered nearby, visibly shaken. "She'll be okay," I told him. He nodded, but his voice broke when he said, "I could have lost them." "You didn't," I said, "because she's stronger than you think." Stephanie reached out for my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. I squeezed gently. "You're welcome." There was a pause. "I don't know if I can ever repay you," she added. "I'm not asking you to," I replied, "but I expect you to keep trying." She smiled through tears. "Deal." That night, as I stood under the stars, a warm wind brushing my cheeks, I felt something loosen inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the space where forgiveness might someday live. This wasn't the end of our pain. But maybe it was the beginning of something else. It began with a scrap of memory. Riley found it one evening while sorting through old ledgers I had kept. Yellowed receipts, canceled checks, faded handwriting. She pulled out a small envelope tucked between two pages, the address printed in my handwriting, but addressed to the university bursar. "I remember this name," she said, voice soft. "This is from my college financial aid office." My heart stopped. I had recognized Riley's story the moment she walked through the gate. No scholarship, high grades, a family struggling with medical bills. I had sent that money anonymously years ago, just enough to keep her in school. She looked at me, wide-eyed. You helped me." I nodded slowly. "A long time ago. I never knew who it was," she whispered. "But I always believed someone saw me." Riley's voice cracked with gratitude and revelation. She hesitated, then reached out to touch my hand, a gesture of raw humanity. That same night, David stumbled upon the broken ledger in the common area, flipping pages to find his mother's neat copperplate script detailing donations to the town library, the urban animal shelter, church charities, and always tuition relief for underprivileged students. One of those recipients, Riley Jensen. He read and reread until the numbers blurred. The realization, a motherhood without expectation, generosity without announcement, sacrifice without recognition, hit him like a freight train. For the first time, he saw Helen Montgomery as more than a woman living in his apartment as an obligation. He saw her legacy, silent yet immense. He didn't approach her the next day, or the day after, but something changed. The way he answered questions became softer. The way he paused mid-sentence before speaking reached my ears like a pre-final concession. He stopped competing with the animals and instead began working beside them. quietly, conscientiously. Month by month, his pride cracked. Yet though the labor had reshaped him, the words he needed to say still lay trapped behind a wall of guilt and regret. I noticed. I gave him space. Because the apology he needed to give wasn't for forgiveness, it was a reckoning. But then came the day everything tipped again. I walked from the main house toward the cottage to drop off extra blankets. Through the slightly open bedroom door, I heard whispers and a sliding click, the faint sound of a phone speaker. Stephanie, her back turned, was on the phone, voice hushed. "Mom, I don't know how much longer we can do this. I'm so sick of sleeping on that couch. David's lost his job. I've spent our savings already. I can't do it anymore." Then her voice cracked. "Could you help with some money? Just a few thousand to help us move? To rent a small apartment again at least?" "I'll pay you back," she added with an edge of desperation. I froze. There was no echo, no footsteps, just the faint hum of her whispering. Then the click that told me the call had ended. My heart clenched. Betrayal tasted cold, sharper than dirt under fingernails. I stepped away slowly, drawing the blanket from my arm and turning back to the barn as if nothing had happened. Work felt heavier that day. Every board I repaired sounded hollow. Every call of the animals sounded too loud. That night, Riley approached me. "Something's wrong," she said. "You're off." I nodded, faintly. "I heard something earlier." She didn't ask more. At the dinner table, David sat quietly, swallowing each bite as if chewing guilt. Stephanie was unusually pale. Halfway through the meal, she pushed her plate away. "I'm sorry," she said softly, voice fragile. "I didn't mean for you to hear. I didn't," I corrected. "I just did." Stephanie's tears came, soft and raw in the flicker of the lantern. "I didn't know where else to turn," she said. "We thought you understood." I leaned back with measured calm. "I understand desperation," I replied, "but I won't subsidize entitlement." David looked up, his eyes filled with remorse. "Mom, I didn't know." "You were too busy trying to reclaim comfort," I said. Silence. Then Stephanie whispered, "I'm sorry." I let them sit in it. I wasn't enraged. I was disappointed. Stronger than anger, disappointment carries weight. Later, I asked David to walk with me. We moved out to the pasture as night settled, Orion's belt blazing overhead. "I know how good you are," I said finally. "Good at being comfortable, good at ambition. But you didn't see me when I wasn't either." His jaw tightened. "I saw Riley last night realize who I was," I continued. "Do you know what that must feel like for me? Nameless, invisible." Until someone else made it clear. David finally spoke. "I haven't told you everything." I stopped walking, looked at him. "I started checking your phone records because I needed to know if you were okay, and it's not just Stephanie, it's us too. I should have come home with you." The pride had cracked, but still nothing resembling an apology. I nodded. That's what listening looks like. We stood there in the dark, father sky above, barn walls close by. Reconciliation was an open work, not a declaration, and ambition without humility is hollow. By dawn, I had reconstructed the rules for the cottage. Stephanie would repay every dollar borrowed, with interest, by working half days once baby Noah was born. David would continue full labor, no exceptions. And if either of them failed to honor that, and gratitude, there was the highway. Miles away, a silent ledger tracked their accountability, their debts, their humiliations earned. The farm's lights flickered on in the mist. Riley's footsteps echoed on the porch. Stephanie came out, wrapped in a blanket, pale but determined. "I understand," she whispered. I patted her shoulder. "Then show me." And in the hush of morning, I felt it, the slow pull of something real. Humility doesn't fix the past, but it can start something better. I found Stephanie in the cottage's modest kitchen late that night, lights low, calculator in hand, surrounded by invoices, baby onesies, and takeout containers. She was balancing finances, trying to piece together a way forward, just the way I'd once done for David's college fund years ago. She looked up when I stepped inside, startled. I closed the door gently behind me, the scent of soy sauce and takeout lingering. "You're up late," I said. My voice was even. She wiped her eyes, blinking rapidly, just trying to make sense of it all. I didn't sit. I leaned against the counter with measured calm. "Then let's talk." She inhaled sharply. "About?" "This debt." I gestured broadly to the scattered papers. "Comfort has a cost." I waited while the silence pulsed between us. My design was simple: truth and accountability. We had been working under an unspoken agreement so far. It was time to make it official. "You believed I was a burden," Stephanie said quietly. Her fingers slid across the printed invoices. "Your mother, she forced me to believe I was the one taking up space, a burden." My skin tightened with memories of the first weeks. No access to good towels, no authority over hot water, no comfort in her mother-in-law's house. She had normalized that belief under my roof. I wasn't angry. I was resolute. "I have a draft for you," I said, sliding a single sheet across the counter. It was typed, headed Residential Employment Agreement. Terms and conditions stated clearly. 2 bedrooms in the cottage. Full utilities. Compensation in exchange for labor. David full-time, Stephanie part-time post-recovery. Repayment for any borrowed money with 5% annual interest. Signing constitutes agreement to comply with rules and accountability. Stephanie's eyes flickered between the document and me. "A contract?" she whispered. "Mom, you came here asking for help." I kept my gaze steady. This is what help looks like. Minutes heard like hours in that cramped kitchen. Stephanie took a shaky breath and picked up the pen. She scribbled her name at the bottom of the page. Her ink bled slightly on the paper, as if her heart weighed her signature down. She slid it back toward me. "I understand," she said, voice trembling but firm. I slid the paper into a folder and handed it back. "This is not a pardon. It's a partnership." Then I looked at David, who had appeared in the doorway, his coat still on, silent. He swallowed. "I didn't want this to cause friction, Kia," he said. "But I support it." He took his pen, added his signature beside Stephanie's. That night, I felt no euphoria, not triumph, only a hard kind of peace. The next day, I walked with Stephanie through the rescue barn. She helped me sort medical bins, counted pill packets, labeled feed sacks. When we finished, she lingered. "I've been thinking about Serenity horses for therapy programs," she said. "Jane Downing Foundation. They accept small operations." I nodded. "We'll apply." Stephanie looked at me. "Thank you. Not for letting us stay, but for giving us a path to belong." I didn't respond. Let her feel that one. It was earned. That afternoon, I met David in the pasture. He was rebuilding a fence section, his arms working the hammer with deliberate care. He paused and looked at me. "Mom, I want to speak with the estate attorney." I nodded slowly. "About what?" "The cottage. The land. We'd like to manage it. Maybe buy or lease permanently." His voice faltered. I kept eye contact. "You want more?" I asked. "Not more," he corrected. "Different." He paused. "I need to pay my way, and I need your blessing." I studied him. No words, just the wind and the cattle's low murmurs. "David," I said finally, "I'm still the owner, but you have a role here if you stay honest." He stepped forward, sure of himself for the first time in months. "Then thank you," he said. His voice was quiet, but it held weight. I nodded. That evening, I reviewed the signed contract folder. Invoices for grain, vet bills, utilities. I lined them in perfect order. I realized something. This was more than a farm. It was sacred promise and restored dignity, a covenant between people who needed each other but no longer owed each other tolerance. I felt Riley's presence behind me. She touched the folder lightly. "You did good," she said softly. "They needed this." I glanced at her. "You needed it too." She nodded, eyes misting. Days turned into weeks. David repaired more barns and tested new soil for organic produce. Stephanie drafted the therapy program proposal. By month's end, we submitted the application for a small grant. The farm felt different now, not just a refuge, but a living, breathing community born of contracts, trust, and earned respect. One afternoon, I sat at the table and watched them work. A stubborn smile tugged at my lips. This is what I created. This is what I deserved to create. I had intended to retain control over the rescue's finances, kept every receipt, every bank transaction flowing through my shell accounts. But confidence comes quietly over time. With Stephanie managing our books day after day, I realized she'd earned the trust. One cold morning, over coffee served in mismatched mugs, I handed her the ledger binder and keys to the finance safe. I want you to manage it, I said. The words felt heavier than any contract I'd signed in decades. From now on, you're in charge of donations, payments, expenses. Her eyes widened. I saw hesitation tempered with pride. Thank you, she whispered. We didn't announce it. We didn't speak of it again. Yet in that handover lay more forgiveness than any apology I'd withheld. Across the farm, David had taken to sleeping in the barn cottage for convenience, so close he could slip out at dawn to feed the horses and spot for sunrise. One afternoon, as I observed him repairing walls on the run-down side stall, I realized something profound. He was rebuilding more than wood. He was rebuilding himself. He cleared out the holding pens, removed old bedding, installed soft rubber mats and ramps for accessibility. Before long, it became clear he was creating a therapy space, a horses and humans healing zone. I said nothing at first, watching. A couple days later, over lunch in the main house, he laid out the plan. I'd like to finish the renovations on the old stall and expand it to offer equine therapy for children with autism, he said. The physical therapy benefits, emotional regulation, I've researched it. With Stephanie's bookkeeping, Riley's veterinary care, and your oversight, we could run something meaningful. I felt a tide shift in me. Yes, folks come here to save animals, and others are finding calm here too. I met his eyes. Go ahead, I said, and make it sustainable. He exhaled, relief and resolution mingling in his expression. Over the next weeks, we worked together in silence, steel railing going up, cushioned floors installed, counters for supplies positioned at child height. One crisp morning, Riley found me feeding goat kids in the paddock. She paused beside me. You know, you're not just rescuing animals, she said softly. You're rescuing people too. I looked at her, smiled. Maybe, I admitted, but only for those willing to be saved. She squeezed my arm, understanding. In the background, cranes and carpenters talked. David's rough hands shaped something new. In the cottage, Stephanie turned receipts into projections, tracking growth and resource allocation with precision. It was a hive of life born from ashes, yet among the thriving farm, a secret pulsed beneath my ribs. Weeks earlier, I had gone to the doctor for a checkup long overdue. They found early-stage heart disease, the cardiologist told me. It's manageable with medication and lifestyle changes, but any stress could exacerbate it. My first reaction? Fear. Then a brand of grim determination. I tucked the diagnosis into the same compartment that held my lotto ticket and my shell company documents. I didn't tell a soul, not David, not Stephanie, not Riley, because revealing it would invite pity, and I didn't need that. I needed momentum, and I was not yet done building. So I slowed down quietly. I watched the curves of horseback riders from the veranda instead of joining them. I let Riley drive to suppliers. I staggered meals until they insisted I sit down with them. When Stephanie placed her hand on my arm one evening and said, "I just wanted to make sure you're okay," I nodded. "I am." My voice was firm. "Just resting." She looked at me, alarm in her eyes, but I smiled and dropped it. I allowed the farm's rhythm to ease me, not to be rescued, but to continue with purpose sans spectacle. David had shifted too. He paused mid-swing one afternoon and said, "Mom, I'm sorry." Not the full apology I'd wanted, but genuine. a man acknowledging he'd begun to see me again, beyond his needs or resentment. I nodded. Sometimes that's all forgiveness requires, a nod in a moment of sincerity. We proceeded with the therapy renovations. We applied for small philanthropic grants. We built rides for veterans and after-school programs for underserved kids. I watched it all with quiet pride. One morning, a parent brought a child for their first session. The boy was non-verbal, terrified of the horse's size. David knelt beside him and whispered encouragement. The horse lowered its head, and the child reached out, fingers brushing mane. They both exhaled. The mother cried silently behind them, healing in motion. I stood under the big barn rafters, hands resting on the railing, listening to the soft clop of hooves. My heart raced unpredictably. I smiled and stood a moment longer. I'd been betrayed. I'd been erased. I'd been erased again. But I came back. With contracts, with care, with equine therapy and baby quilts, with heart disease and still more heart to give. In the end, I might not live to see the full bloom of this farm, but I would be here for enough blossoming to matter. Because legacy isn't in how you start, it's in what you rebuild. Sunlight filtered through the birch trees as Stephanie cradled baby Noah in her arms, walking out to the porch where I sat, wrapped in the homemade wool blanket she brought. The baby stirred, his tiny fingers curled, and she placed him gently in my lap. I looked down at his face, peaceful in newborn sleep, and whispered, "You are never invisible." As I smoothed the blanket around him, the words felt sacred, heavy with every sacrifice, every moment I was ignored, until today. Somewhere between her weeping and his breathing, softened in sleep, I felt a tremor of wonder. He was real. He was mine, and theirs. The culmination of everything I'd rebuilt, endured, and insisted upon. David arrived then, sleeves rolled up, hands calloused from barn work yet unfolded in uncertainty. He paused by the porch railing, watching us. His gaze rested on his son, then on me. The weight of those last months, the broken record of disgrace, reconciliation, forgiveness, and now creation, etched across his face. I set Noah gently in Stephanie's arms and stood. David drew closer. "It's beautiful," he said, voice unsteady. He cleared his throat, sweat and tenderness mingling. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I owe you a lifetime of apologies I might never fully say out loud." I studied him. The scars in his soul and mine mirrored in his eyes. Time had softened the sharp edges, but grief and regret remained. I nodded once. They offered to let me stay in the cottage until the farmhouse was renovated. I declined. I returned to the main house where I belonged, or rather, reclaimed the place I had once been peeled out from. My steps across the wood floor felt full again, weighted with presence, not obligation. They wanted to celebrate with a small gathering, a few close friends, Riley, and a minister who helped officiate the naming. A quiet event that felt like home. Stephanie named him Noah, a name she'd chosen weeks ago, meaning rest and hope. She didn't know I had whispered those same words to myself at 3 a.m. when the lottery numbers lit up the screen. Riley gifted him a tiny knitted hat in the shape of a horse's mane. I gifted him the blanket. I traced his small wrist with my finger and said again quietly, "You are never invisible." After the guests left, we gathered in the living room. The baby asleep in the carrier, the scent of lavender wafting from the diffuser in the corner. David approached me again. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me because I've relearned humility. I expect to earn your trust again, day by day. That's what grace feels like." I looked into those eyes, still capable of pride, still capable of mistake, but now shaped by effort. "Grace is earned, not given," I replied. Silence followed, not out of tension, but reverence. He bowed his head slightly, and I sensed the honesty in that gesture. Real redemption was slow work, but at least now I believed he would see it through. When David left the room, Stephanie knelt beside me, her eyes watering again. Nostalgia mingled with fear in her glance. "I don't know if I deserve this," she whispered. "Deserving isn't part of it," I replied. "Preserving is." She nodded, and in that gesture, something shifted. We were no longer mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. We were women who had built something fragile, and fragile things last only if they are built on respect and purpose. Late that evening, I found Noah sleeping on my chest, cradle of chest rising slowly. I lay on the couch, finally fully awake for the first time in weeks, holding a life I helped bring forth. In that moment, I felt the ache of everything that came before. I also felt fierce pride. They had all looked through me before. David, Stephanie, even I nearly gave up looking at myself. But here I was, silent, seen, strong. The following morning, I sat on the porch with Riley. She sipped her tea and spoke softly. He told me last night he's filing to transition the farm into a nonprofit, naming it Montgomery Equine Sanctuary and Therapeutic Farm. He said, because this place saved me, and it saved others. I looked at the baby peacefully napping nearby, the sunlight wrapping him in gold. I looked at the animals grazing, the fields green with new life, the barn taking shape under David's careful eye, the foundation living up to the intention, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Being seen, not as a burden, not as someone's mother who once slept on their couch, not even as a charity case, but as a woman who rebuilt, redirected, resurrected the parts of herself buried under obligation and silence, and did it all without spectacle or bitterness. I held the baby's hand and whispered, "Rest, Hope Legacy." When David came out carrying coffee mugs, he offered one to me. I took it and stood. "Let me walk with you," I said. We strolled through the healing paddock, the therapy stall nearing completion. The horses flicked their tails and chewed hay. A soft breeze teased the leaves overhead. David glanced at me. "Thank you," he said quietly. I smiled. "Keep going." He looked at the baby, then nodded. "I will." I watched them, his family, built out of choices and consequences more than biology. I felt gratitude, yes, but also resolve. Because this was never about returning to the quiet I lost. It was about stepping forward into the kind of life that saw me back. The day she was seen again wasn't about validation. It was about presence. And between the ragged cords of apology and the clean lines of restoration, presence carries more power than words ever could. Summer rolled in like an old promise renewed. One morning, I found David and Stephanie seated at the kitchen table, pens in hand, forms spread before them. They were applying to register the farm as Montgomery Equine Sanctuary and Therapeutic Farm, Inc., and asking to be named legal managers. "You two ready?" I asked, with the same calm I used when transferring finances to Stephanie weeks ago. "Yes," David said softly. "We want to honor what you built and make it permanent." Stephanie offered a nod, eyes luminous. "We want this to last beyond us." It felt like harvest, not of crops, but of integrity. I didn't react beyond a quiet smile. Acts meant more than words now. Weeks later, the certificate arrived. Legal status secure. They hosted their first community day. Children and veterans tried equine therapy sessions, petting rescued animals, seeing hope blossoming in real time. My heart swelled watching them stand behind the barn, hosting like owners, smiling like they finally belonged. That night, I began preparing what I called the quiet papers. They were documents I spread out on the reading table in my bedroom, deeds to the land, the caretaker's cottage, financial trust signatures, all set in order. I didn't intend to leave them behind any moment soon, but creating them felt right. Like closing the loop of what had begun with that first lost ticket and stretched out over years of rebuilding. No speeches, no goodbyes, not my style. I placed the signed deeds and trust files into the same wooden box I'd saved from my wedding day, a quiet reflection that I was moving on in my own way. Then I slipped in a small envelope addressed simply, "To my son and daughter-in-law, stewardship, not pardon." I traced the edges of the envelope, soft leather, inked smooth. Inside, I inserted a final note. It read, "If you ever treat someone like they're invisible, may the wind howl louder than your name." signed simply, Mom. I left it on the bedside table next to the box of papers. I didn't intend to share it until the moment they needed it, and I eventually couldn't deliver it in person. Somewhere in mid-fall, I fell asleep and didn't wake up. No drama, just that strange silence that comes when a life reaches its own boundary. I was found in bed by Riley, who called Dr. Flores, the same cardiologist who diagnosed me. He confirmed it quietly, the heart disease quietly progressing. No one else needed the notification. It was my secret until the necessary event. David and Stephanie sat in my bedroom that evening, reading the note I'd left. Their faces moved from confusion to understanding, from grief to revenge on themselves at how late they'd listened. David opened the box and studied the deeds and trust documents with trembling fingers. Stephanie gently placed her hand over his, her eyes shining with regret. Riley watched from the doorway, tears unshed, finally knowing the full arc of the story. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The next morning, they surprised the sanctuary staff with a letter announcing the full transition. Montgomery Equine Sanctuary and Therapeutic Farm Inc. donated in full to them under trust and management conditions I'd laid out. They co-signed acceptance with a vow to never repeat past wrongs. That afternoon, they found me peacefully resting, arms crossed over a soft blanket, sunlight across the birch floor housing cottage. It looked like sleep, only with stillness deeper than any pain. No illness rattling, no fear, just serenity. When the realization pressed in, they gathered outside in the early chill on the far meadow, where the fence lines met the horizon, late-season golden grasses whispering. David stood close to Stephanie, arms around her waist, baby Noah in her arms. He finally said what had needed saying. Mom. Emphasis measured, colors shifting with grief and resolution. Not Helen, not deferred name, just the one she gave him. Mom, we are so sorry. We will carry this farm, this legacy, with the care and humility you taught us. Stephanie pulled the baby closer, her face still wet with quiet tears. We will never forget what you rebuilt. For us, because of us, despite us. I watched them, invisible yet aware. My vision blurred as the wind swept across the field, tall grasses bending like silent praise. They stayed like that, holding Noah, leaning into each other, standing still amid the life I helped forge. The U-Haul never needed to come back. There was no highway again. From somewhere across the field, Atlas neighed, a soft, low sound. Other rescued horses raised their heads, butterflies danced. I knew that sound was closure's resonance, acceptance that what begins with hardship can end in blessing. The day she was seen again belonged to them now. Owners, not guests. Children, not strangers. As dusk settled, light turned golden. David put a finger to his lips. Stephanie read it. Then they whispered to each other, Mom. They said it again, together. I felt their reverence from someplace deep, and the word carried across the fields as wind did, carrying memory, acknowledgement, and promise. I let them be the keepers of the legacy, and for once I let the farm be home to someone I had earned the trust to leave it to. Not pity, not regret, but preservation. And beneath the hayloft rafters, I lay down for the final time, heart full, purpose fulfilled. Legacy isn't about being visible. It's about making someone else visible. And at the end, they saw me.